on to your butts.
There's so many components that build a great shonen or battle anime. Whether it be a strong leading character, an absolutely despicable villain, amazing animation, a striking style, thrilling fights, or a fantastic supporting cast. Many outstanding anime use some or all of these elements for colorful results. But the anime I want to discuss today uses those elements to color itself a little differently. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 1, Phantom Blood, is so effective because it tells a simple story while remaining absolutely ridiculous yet sincere in its execution. For the uninitiated, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is an ongoing manga series written and illustrated by the unaging sorcerer known as Hirohiko Araki. JJBA is separated into parts, where a descendant of the Joestar bloodline is fated to battle supernatural enemies, solve mysteries, but mostly kick ass. What's unique to the series is how each part manages to feel separate while also carrying the elements of past parts forward. At times, JJBA will shift genres away from battle anime into something unexpected, or sometimes stop following the protagonist altogether for a different perspective. This allows for a lot of new ideas and drastic changes, whether it be battle mechanics, different styles of storytelling, or a refreshing new art style from part to part. The anime studio David Production stood and delivered an exceptional animation, visualizing and retaining much of the manga's versatility, as well as celebrating the source material. With that out of the way, let's start from the beginning with David Production's take on Part 1, Phantom Blood. Phantom Blood is a unique start for the JoJo series. While the rest of the series evolves into unique powers and absolutely absurd plot beats, Part 1 feels pared down by comparison. It's a nice start if you're not prepared for the trademark JoJo insanity, but by any other means, the simplicity feels like a letdown compared to later parts. Regardless, if you're interested in the overarching narrative of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Part 1 is paramount. This might be a little bit of a stretch, but Part 1 kinda feels like the early Thor movies. Like, Thor 1 and 2 are okay at best, but more importantly, they set up a lot of important characters and story beats for Ragnarok to completely kill it. Exclaimer: I think Phantom Blood is nowhere near as bad as Thor 2's subtitle I've forgotten. Even though Part 1 is only 9 episodes long, it manages to capture and combine horror, martial arts, coming of age, drama, and the most important of all, tasty cheese, all wrapped up tightly in this late 1800s English setting. Phantom Blood's clashing tones alongside its brisk pacing and incredibly straightforward storytelling might make for a clumsy first impression. But don't be fooled by first impressions. Part 1 doesn't waste your time and fills you in on everything that lays the groundwork moving forward. And it's pretty nice to look at too. I haven't spent much time discussing OPs in my videos so far, but it would be a sin to not discuss the pure, unadulterated hype that is Sono Chino Sadame. As is for any opening, it's a chance to introduce the main characters, tone, and hints as what's to come. Right off the bat, we're reminded where JoJo comes from. We see manga panels of characters leading to the reveal of our main character, and later on, there's panels of our two main characters. Not only is this a celebration of Araki's manga coming to life, but also shows how serious David Pro were in taking the source material and presenting it in a new light. Something else you'll notice is this OP is beautifully rendered in 3D. This is a huge shakeup considering that Part 1 itself is primarily 2D animation. While I'm not the biggest fan of 3D in my anime, I'll be damned. It adds a lot of punch to Sono Chino Sadame. The OP retains Araki's art style, while mostly appearing to be 2D shots that can use really slick 3D camera movement to enhance the shots, or use transitions that would be hard to look decent in 2D animation. This, coupled with the use of filters, rapid color changes, and emphasis on facial animations, make for a very unique and awesome opening. Take a moment and think of some of your favorite anime OPs. The extraordinary OPs have something special, a rich blend of great animation and bombastic, catchy tunes. Sono Chino Sadame's music itself is different from your everyday anime OP, with rip-roaring rock brass music that feels a little funky, a little rock, and a lot of badass. The OP leads up to my favorite portion of Sono Chino Sadame, the end, where we hear the singer Hiroki Tominaga bellow the slow build-up of rock brass band tunes, capping off with the lead singer almost cheering on our titular hero, always gets my blood pumping. If you've ever heard you never skip a JoJo OP, this is exactly why. The art direction from the manga is a huge influence on David Pro's production of the anime. That sounds incredibly obvious. Like, hey, did you know the Harry Potter movies were heavily influenced by the Harry Potter books? JoJo not only carries the art direction from the manga forward, but is animated as though the manga itself has come to life. That sounds magical and all, but what I mean is the panels are lifted from the manga and are quite literally brought to life, adding in animation and other nice little touches to make something fresh yet familiar. With that in mind, most scenes shaped by the manga are effective for scenes involving dialogue, reflective character moments, or monologues. Instead of feeling like a means to cut costs in animation, these scenes also have another advantage, with a surreal use of color and additional abstract art washing over the frame, displaying the mood of the character or the scene, resulting in what would be unremarkable in other anime look incredibly striking here. Something JoJo is known for, and you might have noticed yourself, is the incredibly macho and rippling physiques of the characters. The manga of Part 1 was written and released in the late 80s, and Araki was tremendously influenced by Western media. At the time, there was a deluge of action movies starring huge buff dudes like Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone, Jean-Claude Van Damme, and many more. The iconic 80s Herculean action stars helped set the stage for Araki's character design and story.
I wonder who the strongest person in the world is. This question was basically the beginning of JoJo. So basically stuff to do with immortality and super macho guys and how strong they can get. That was what I was pursuing.
I love that Araki's early work is inspired by awesome, cheesy action movies and their absolutely buff stars. It's even more interesting considering how his art style matures throughout JJBA's releases. Another inspiration Araki drew from was Tetsuo Hara's Fist of the North Star. Fist of the North Star was another massively popular shonen manga that was released a few years before Araki put Part 1 into print. There's a lot of similarities between the two. Characters are hyper-masculine beefcakes, the use of over-the-top martial arts, and are drawn in a very similar style. It could be said that both mangaka were influenced by similar media and whatnot, but I think Araki says it best.
He completely revolutionized the way the human body was represented in manga, thus he influenced me in this level.
If hyper-masculine dudes aren't really your thing, maybe you could find joy in how much Araki takes fashion into consideration with his character designs. In most action anime, the lead character always wears that one signature outfit, and we rarely see them wear anything else, unless they're learning to drive for the first time or something just as cool. Something I've grown to love about JoJo's is how well or bizarrely dressed the characters can be, as well as the frequency of costume changes. Jonathan, more than most, has a varied, wild wardrobe. As a child, he wears more posh clothes, and later on he wears a diverse collection of outfits depending on the scene. Aside from anime fashion, another iconic JoJo thing is poses.
The poses are influenced from Italian sculptures. I really like the way the bodies are twisted, and it makes me want to turn them into a drawing.
A lot of poses in Phantom Blood and beyond that have become iconic for their seemingly impossible stance. And lastly, another supremely JoJo element are the sound word kanji that show up from time to time.
They were influenced from horror movies and rock music. In progressive rock and horror music, they use synthesizers and an instrument called a mellotron. And sometimes I really want that tinkly kind of sound it produces for some scenes.
The sun is gone. You will not live to see it rise once more.
These sound words are something that are very unique to JoJo and add another level of style to the presentation. A lot of these are minor details in the grand scheme of things, but they add something special to JJBA that isn't seen anywhere else. Coincidentally, JoJo shares some similarities to what I discussed in my last Why Watch. No, not big Bara boys, rather references to Western media. Oddly enough, when naming characters, Western pop culture plays a huge role. A painfully obvious Part 1 example is the hoodlum turned BFF Robert E.O. Speedwagon, clearly an homage to the classic rock band REO Speedwagon. If you're thinking now is the time to fly, don't worry, not all characters' namesakes are hilarious no-brainers. There's a super cool pretty boy knight named Bruford, whose namesake is a bit more subtle than others. When he's introduced, we're given a lengthy backstory that felt like Bruford could be based on an actual knight. Feeling unsure how legit a knight in JoJo could be, I looked into Bruford, and in doing so, I learned of Araki's chicanery. Bruford's knighthood is a big fiction, but his namesake is a bit more elaborate. Bruford's name derives from the drummer Bill Bruford, who plays in the likes of Yes, King Crimson, Genesis, and others. The combination of both seemingly real fictional history with musicians Araki likes is an additional layer of good times nonsense that makes JoJo's so much fun. However, not every single character is named after someone, but so many characters have pop culture names throughout not just Part 1, but all of JoJo. It's a weird aspect of JJBA. It smacks of writing found in something like a fanfic. It can seem as if we're supposed to learn aspects of the character based on whatever they're named after, but it rarely works out that way, at least in Part 1. Unless you're talking about Wang Chang, whose namesake is the 80s English new wave band Wang Chung. Very clever, Araki. Personally, I think it adds to the absurdity and the carefree, cheesy fun that is JoJo's. Believe it or not, Araki doesn't use his naming scheme to only pay respects to his favorite bands.
Well, it makes it easy for me to name characters and easy for readers to remember them.
This is fascinating to me, especially as an American who, in the last 10 years or so, got into Japanese media. Something I struggle in any Japanese media to this day is remembering all the cast's names, because chances are they are Japanese names. And like most Westerners, I'm not familiar with most Japanese names, unless they're Shigeru Miyamoto. I don't think these references to Western media are incredibly distracting, but rather a fun way to keep the audience interested, eager to decipher characters' names, traits, or speculate who Araki might reference in the future. Throughout Phantom Blood, the conflict between the two main characters feels as if they're playing a deadly game of chess, making moves to outsmart each other with upsets at every turn. The setting, pacing, drama, and overall absurdity makes the back and forth between Dio and Jonathan positively intoxicating. I can't overstate how quick and well-paced the beginning of Phantom Blood is. Within a few episodes, you watch as Jonathan grows into an adult, learning his motivations along the way. Within the first 3 episodes, we learn the backstory of nearly every character, while pushing the story into the bizarre by episode 3. The following 6 episodes are the real meat of Phantom Blood, chronicling Jonathan's journey to take down Dio and his burgeoning dominion. Expect a few twists and turns as you watch Phantom Blood, but be warned, this anime is not for everyone. Expect some intense gore and huge baratid. Phantom Blood leans more into the gothic and drab setting of 1800s England by presenting the likes of Jack the Ripper and overall bleak vibes. However, I want to specify that Phantom Blood isn't very fanciful. Like, yeah, there's magical anime martial arts and the like, yet there's a sense of faux realism, and because of that, JoJo blends crazy anime drama and historical fiction, making it feel different than most other shonen. It doesn't go off book too often, but there's a few twists and turns to keep things fresh. JoJo consistently feels like it's set in a world that is essentially ours, but maybe a little bit more absurd. The almost realistic setting alongside adventurous yet ostensibly outrageous characters and narrative makes for a gripping watch. Phantom Blood is the story of two seminal characters that impact the rest of the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure series. You have our hero, Jonathan Joestar, an absolute juggernaut of justice. First impression,
Damn, boy, he's thick! Boy, that's a thick-ass boy!
But before Jonathan's an absolute unit, we see him in his youth as a spoiled rich kid whose only goal is to be the best gentleman ever, like his well-to-do papa. Early on, there's a lot of trial and error in Jonathan's quest to be a good boy. Despite his failures, Jonathan is consistent in that he wants to do right by those he loves, at any expense. This goes hand in hand with Jonathan's growth throughout Phantom Blood. His desire to become the ultimate gentleman leads to Jonathan getting the biggest gains of all time, learning a special form of martial arts, and shouldering the responsibility of becoming the embodiment of good boy. Personally, I find it a little refreshing having the lead character as someone who's not so focused on making quips or charming the audience, rather motivated to do what's right and stand by what he believes in. Yet, because of that, you might find Jonathan a little dry. Jonathan is a precious cinnamon roll, and despite the sugary naivete, he allows his convictions to guide him. Thankfully, most folks can see Jonathan as this pure, wholesome boy, including the most unlikely people. A great example of this is in a scene where after a vicious attempt at mugging, Jonathan befriends the most street scum odd job ruffian bad guy named Speedwagon. Yeah, Speedwagon and his goons caught a major beatdown, but JoJo's intentions of straight up not murdering these guys and explaining what he was doing completely won them over. Jonathan may not be the most charismatic protag around, but he makes up for it elsewhere. He really shines in his fights. They're always set up with cool enemies and wild scenarios, in which Jonathan solves things in the big, strong shonen brute force sort of way, resulting in maximum levels of hype. If Jonathan is the heart and soul of Phantom Blood, Dio Brando is the scoundrel and edgelord.
I'm sad, I'm heartbroken, I'm sexy, I'm angry, I'm threatening.
Part 1 begins with a great tragedy, resulting in Papa Joestar adopting Dio as a favor to Dio's recently deceased father. Before Dio moves in, you can gather that Dio grew up on the wrong side of the tracks. Yet despite that, he is eager to move in. When Dio finally arrives at the Joestar estate, emerging from the carriage via front flip and the JoJo trademark menacing kanji, he front flipped right into my heart. I remember my first viewing, my mind was racing. Whoa, Dio's so cool! That Japanese stuff probably means he's evil though, but maybe he's just a little bit edgy, who knows? That train of thought immediately went off the tracks. This is Dio, and he's always the worst. As Phantom Blood progresses, we watch on as Dio plunges into depravity. He'll beguile and exploit any underhanded tactic to gain more wealth and power, but always with a smile. Shortly after moving in, Dio displays to his adopted father that he is a worthy gentleman by demonstrating flawless manners and being smarter than Jonathan. In a boxing match against Jonathan, Dio expertly uses all of his skills to absolutely crush the boy. And when Dio takes down Jonathan with one amazing punch, it crushes Jonathan completely. Dio's continued campaign of stamping out Jonathan's hopes and motivation, all the while looking super cool, was taking its toll. But this wasn't even the worst of it. As Dio was gaining a following around town, Jonathan was quickly befriending a girl named Marina. Eventually, Dio realizes Jonathan isn't suffering enough, so he decides to shut down his love life by stealing a kiss from Marina. If you're wondering, that's where the "but it was me, Dio" meme comes from. It's an extra layer of awful knowing the context. This is an example of Dio tiptoeing the line of "that's a bruh" moment to something far worse. And that's why I think Dio is one of the best anime villains ever. It's easy to feel sympathetic for Dio, but as he continues to do whatever it takes to be the best boy to inherit the Joestar state, you quickly realize Dio will do anything for power and doesn't care who he has to step on to reach it. There's something inherently exciting watching a total scumbag plot out the most nefarious and awful shit to hurt a kind-hearted young man, and then seeing how Jonathan deals with it. There's even moments where Dio appears to have changed his ways. When we get to see Dio and Jonathan as fully grown big buff college education boys, there's a camaraderie between the two as they work together to win their last college rugby game. It's a fleeting moment, but it's surprising. It almost seems as if there's a brotherly bond between the two, despite their past. Dio is such a talented manipulator that the moments like this can even fool the viewer into thinking maybe he was just a little bit edgy. The rival trope is a classic for a reason. And while Dio is definitely the bad guy in this rivalry, I find this rivalry special as we get to watch on as Dio grows from a childhood bully into a cruel monster. While there's some elements of Phantom Blood that seem fairly ordinary, the fights are anything but. Like most battle anime, encounters can feel a bit generic. Lots of talk of strategy and how you'll never defeat me, geez. The special part of the action that always captures me is how so many components of a fight can suddenly pivot into the extraordinary. A great example of this is when Jonathan meets and then becomes a student of the eccentric Will Zappelli. Zappelli is a well-studied practitioner of the Ripple, a form of martial arts that utilizes Haman. Haman is an energy manifested by ripples throughout the body, and the energy itself is identical to that of the sun. This is expertly explained while Zappelli, punches a frog? Do you like frogs? Can punching a frog to annihilate the rock underneath truly happen, or is this more anime magic? We'll be discussing this tonight on Ripples, believe it or not.
This one was invented by a writer.
Another interesting facet of the fights in JoJo's is how most characters are quick-witted, capable of drastically changing a fight by applying their abilities in an unexpected way. To be clear, I don't mean how in Yu-Gi-Oh! Yugi can break the rules of a card in a surprising way. Rather, the fundamentals of a character's abilities are always explained, and they use them in unique but feasible ways. An early example of this is while training Jonathan and Haman, Zappelli shows the application of Haman in an amazing way, dislocating his shoulder to increase the range of his punch, aptly titled Zoom Punch. Despite all that, the animation in these fights will not be the best you've ever seen. Most action relies on a lot of setup static shots and then huge impact shots. Not saying it's bad by any means, rather it's going for the style as if you're reading the manga and it stays true to that aesthetic. However, this makes the action easy to follow, which gives it the propensity to be outrageously hyped. The fights coincide with the dramatic storytelling of JoJo, building ridiculous tension and then suddenly dialing it up to 11. This blends really nicely with the quick pacing, allowing for the action to really show off how creative and outrageous it can be. While we are currently in a JoJo recession with Part 5 recently ending, there is no better time to take the dive into JoJo's Bizarre Adventure to prep for Part 6's eventual release. Part 1 does a great job of establishing how wacky things can get, showcases really fantastic characters, and has hype action that will leave you wondering if it can ever be topped. As it stands, Part 1 is typically seen as a weaker part compared to later JoJo's, but compared to other shonen anime, there's something quite special about it. Blending of classical horror and Fist of the North Star makes for something that feels unique, yet instantly familiar. And besides, now you can finally ask, is that a JoJo reference? And be in on the epic joke. You can watch Part 1 Phantom Blood on Netflix, Hulu, YouTube, Crunchyroll, and Amazon. Yo, thanks so much for watching. I'll try to keep this short. If you enjoyed watching this and my other videos introducing hype as heck animated programming, consider supporting me on Patreon. My Patreon is a bit bare bones at the moment, so if there's something you'd like to see there, feel free to let me know. Also, there's no obligation, but all proceeds go towards production and upkeep of my gear. If offering support is not in the cards for you right now, I totally understand. But if you can share this video, write a comment, or throw it a like, that would be huge. Thanks again.